All righty, we are officially live. Thank you all for being here this evening. My name is Garrett Mintz. I'm the founder of Ambition in Motion. Tonight, we are going to have a mentor workshop all about how you can build vulnerability in your mentor relationship and help your student with accountability and help your student broaden their perspective and your mentee broaden their perspective. So when it comes to mentor relationships, we know that vulnerability is the key. We're going to get started in 10 minutes. So if you're watching the recording of this, please feel free to fast forward by 9.5 minutes roughly. We will get started at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we're going to get started in just a moment. I'm going to copy the links, post them on the site, and allow everybody to jump in. So I'm excited to have you all here this evening. Okay. So I'm just copying over all the links, getting it live on our website. Super excited to have you all here for our workshop this evening. We're going to cover some really important things. By the way, hopefully you've started to have your conversations with your mentee so far. I know there are some students and they are sometimes maybe a little introverted. They're still building their level of comfort with reaching out to a professional, even though it's you, a mentor. But yeah, I mean, be patient. Sometimes it takes a while for them to jump in and be comfortable with reaching out, and that's okay. And that's just sometimes how it works. But yeah, what I know is that patience is crucial. That's something we talked about in our workshop last time a few weeks ago. But anyways, all the links are posted. I'm so excited. I'm glad people are starting to jump in and be in this workshop this evening. So I'm just going to make a little comment here. We're going to get started in about 7.5 minutes. Okay, so yeah, like I said, we're gonna get started in about 7.5 minutes. I'm extremely excited to have you all here. So yeah, hopefully, I'd love to learn just if anybody's jumping in early, if they'd love to, if they'd like to share, how their initial mentor phone calls have gone, and any interesting conversations you've had so far, any interesting topics you've discussed. I'd love to learn about that. So if you want to post that in the comments area, we'd love to learn about that. But yeah, hopefully by this point in time in the semester, you've already had that first call, ideally maybe even had that second or even third phone call, and ideally you're starting to have things click in the relationship. That is awesome. If you're struggling, send me an email. I'm more than happy to discuss and provide insight, guidance, and ways that we could go about making this a better relationship. I know, like I said before, some students are introverted, so they're still building their level of comfort. I mean, we do our best on our end to run our workshops and encourage them to reach out, but ultimately we recognize that for mentorship to thrive, the student needs to drive the relationship. As a mentor, you react to them. You react to what your mentee gives you. You react to the advice that they're looking for, the questions that they have, but ultimately you react to them, not the other way around. And so for some students, they signed up for the program, they said, I'm going to invest in this, I'm going to make the most out of this. And sometimes they're struggling to get over that hump. Hopefully this gets them there, or at least it gets them starting to get there. And I really appreciate your patience with the program as students are building a level of comfort with getting mentors. But anyways, yeah, that's something that I wanted just to mention and encourage you just to be patient with your student as we enter this mentor relationship. But yeah, if you all have any questions or comments, please post them in the comment area. Yeah, we can we'll be getting started, like I said, in about 5.5 minutes. So yeah, we'll get started in a moment. Making sure all the links are posted properly. It looks like they are. So yeah, so we're gonna get started in a few minutes. I wonder if, while you're mentoring a student or while you're mentoring somebody else, I'm curious, are you learning anything about yourself? Are you learning anything about your mentor relationship? Or are you learning anything from your mentee that you're working with that maybe you didn't realize about yourself? Are there any interesting insights that you're gaining? I'd love to learn about that, because I think ultimately so often when we think about mentorship, we think about like us being the mentor, and we think that we're the ones strictly delivering the advice. But ultimately at the end of the day, I think from the stories you hear from the mentees that you're working with, that they have a lot to share, that they've got a lot to give, they've got a lot to offer. And sometimes you can apply something that they've learned or applied in your life, whether that means some new technology or some new guidance, some new insight, some new perspective. Ultimately, mentorship is a two-way street. It goes both ways. And I recognize that no matter how young your mentee is, they have a different perspective than what you have, and that perspective, it could be extremely valuable to you. And so that's, always something that I want to strive and encourage. So I'd love to learn if you have any comments or just want to post in the comment area, anything that you've learned so far from your mentor relationship that was different, that was maybe something you didn't expect, or that's something that your mentee, that when you spoke about, you're like, wow, I didn't realize that that's what you're going through. But whether it be a broadened perspective or some new insight or a question they asked you, maybe you had a breakthrough yourself. Did you feel comfortable sharing with them any things that you're going through, that you're really fascinated to build a deeper relationship, I guess? Sometimes when you have a mentor relationship, what will happen is you will share things about your personal life that maybe you don't share with your significant other or your closest friend, because there's this layer of someone being a stranger, or someone that you're just meeting for the first time, or that you're just getting to know. And because they're a little bit distant from you, you feel a little more comfortable sharing some of the intimate details of what's going on in your world. That, ultimately it builds a stronger bond, because you trusted them to keep your secrets, essentially, and that you trusted them to listen to what you had to say. I don't know if you're feeling that, or you're starting to build those types of bonds with your mentee, but I'd encourage it. I feel like when it comes to mentorship, if you expect your mentee to open up to you, if you open up to them, that's a great way to set the example. So that's just one thing that I'd strongly encourage. By the way, we're going to get started in about 2.5 minutes. So if you're watching the recording right now, you can fast forward about 2.5 minutes. If you're just joining in right now, thank you for being here. I'm so grateful, so glad that you all could be here. We're going to cover some really interesting topics tonight. We're going to talk about ways and strategies you can go about getting your mentee to be vulnerable with you. I know sometimes when you have that mentor relationship, it's kind of, oh, well, I'm doing this, or, oh, I'm doing that, or you're doing this. It's very, I don't want to say transactional, but I say extrinsic. By extrinsic, I mean it's very on the surface, very superficial. It's something that you would share with anybody. And I want to encourage you to build those deeper relationships. And I'm going to give you some tips on how to go about doing that tonight in the workshop. And by the way, any of the questions that I suggest that you ask or that you pursue, I'm going to post them in the comments area. So if you're like, oh man, what did he say? You'll have that there as a reference point and as a guide. So yeah, I'm really excited. We're going to get started in a little over 2 minutes. So thank you all for being here. We're also going to talk about accountability and perspective, because that's something that's crucial. I know that one thing we spoke about in our last workshop was about how to have patience with a student and then how to set expectations. But I want to take that a step further. When it comes to accountability, ultimately, if you're telling the student what to do, if you are just saying like, hey, this is what you need to do, the likelihood that it's going to stick on them is low. The best mentors ask the best questions. And so what we're going to cover in this workshop tonight is how to ask really good questions that gets your mentee thinking. Because often people know their own answers to their own questions. And by that, I just mean when they say, hey, I'm struggling with this, most people in their mind know what they're willing to do, what they're comfortable with, actually, what action steps they're actually comfortable with doing. Now, the action steps that you suggest for them might be in line with what they had in mind, but it might not be. And if it's not, don't perceive them as not applying those skills or those attributes or those suggestions in the real world as not respecting your advice. It just means that they look at their work differently. And so therefore, I find mentorship to be most successful when you're asking them the questions, saying, hey, how would you handle this type of situation? Or what do you think the best move is in terms of how to get to where you want to go? Because ultimately what we know is that if you're able to ask them these questions and be able to pull out of them what they're interested in and what they think is the right answer to their own problems, that is a much greater likelihood of actually getting them to act and respond. So by the way, thank you all for being here. I see more and more people are jumping in, joining in. If you have any questions, any comments, please post it in the, hey, Gary, thank you so much for commenting. That's awesome. Please post any comments or questions you may have in the chat area. I'd love to learn, are there any things that you're learning from this mentor relationship that maybe surprised you, or that were something that was different than what you expected? I would love to learn it. Post in the comment area. What is something that your mentee has either taught you, or just by learning from their perspective, something that you learned about yourself? I love to learn about it in the comment area. Great. So Gary, you asked him to come tomorrow with what he wants to do and what he doesn't want to do. I think that's great. I think setting goals with your mentee is huge, because ultimately that is a way that you're going to make progress with your mentor relationship. So yeah, Post any things that you've learned, any questions that you've had, any questions you have for me about anything at all, post in the comment area. I will answer them in the workshop this evening. So it is 7 o'clock. We are going to get started. I'm so excited. I'm so grateful to have you all here. We're going to be covering some really cool topics tonight. We're going to be talking about questions that you can go about stimulating a vulnerable conversation with your mentee. We're also going to talk about how you can ask your mentee questions to help build their accountability. And then we're going to talk about how to broaden their perspective. Sometimes you'll have a mentee that's like very narrowly focused on one thing, and you're thinking to yourself like, hey, there's a lot more out there. There's a lot more that you can accomplish, but you can't just tell them that, because if you just told them that, and if it was that simple, mentorship would be the simplest thing in the world, but it's not. It's about the questions that you ask them. So I'm going to share with you some suggested questions that I've used in the past that have been really effective for me in building mentor relationships, as well as other mentor relationships that I've facilitated. I've facilitated hundreds of them, probably even close to 1,000 of them. So I believe that you can get a lot of value from these suggested questions when working with your mentee. So this workshop is going to be about 15 minutes long, and then maybe another 5-10 minutes of Q&A at the very end. If you've got any questions about anything, post in the comment area. I promise you I'll get to them. I'm excited to answer your questions. I'm excited to continue to learn about how your mentor relationship is going. So one thing we talked about in our workshop last time was the 3 keys to success in this program. That is strategy, that is story, that is state. I reiterated because it is so important. Because here's the thing, if you go into your mentor conversation with your mentee and you're not in a state, let's say you're stressed, your mind is somewhere else, you're not in a good state, you're having a bad hair day, your coffee wasn't as warm as you like it to be in the morning, your breakfast didn't work out great, you got caught in traffic. I don't care what's going on with your world, because ultimately, if you are not in a state conducive for being successful in this mentor conversation, you're not going to give off positive energy. And if you're expecting like, hey, my mentee is just going to love what I have to say, even if I'm coming with no energy, like I'm in a bad mood, that I can promise you it's not going to work out that well, because your state is transparent. Your state is effective. I mean, 55% of our communication is with our body language. Another 37% is with our vocal intonation or vocal inflection. Only 7% is the actual words that we say. So when it comes to mentorship, even if it's over the phone, like if your body's in a bad state physically, you can tell over the phone that you're not in a good state. So what I would suggest that you do before every conversation, you can do a power pose. If you've ever heard of it, Amy Cuddy's got an amazing TED talk about it. You stand up like as if you're Superman or Superwoman, and you're taking up space. But another thing that you can do is you can stretch out, you can get loose. I mean, one thing I challenge you to do right now, if you'd be open to it, is to stand up, shake it out, get loose, do a shimmy, scream at the top of your lungs if you want, just go, yeah, just let it loose, let it out, let the blood flow. Because what I know is that when you get your blood flowing, you're releasing endorphins in your mind. When you're releasing endorphins in your mind, you're putting yourself into a state conducive for retaining information. So if you do that before your mentor conversations, I can promise you at minimum, you're going to be in a better mood, because your emotions drive your emotions. I always love doing that. It's a lot of fun. The other key is the story. So what is the story you tell yourself? Are you telling yourself a story for, why your mentee is a slacker, or why you're not good enough to be a mentor, or why this relationship won't work out? If that's the case, I can promise you it's not going to go the way you want to. I can promise you, you will accomplish up to the goal that you set for yourself, up to the bar that you've laid out for yourself, and no further. But if you set yourself a very high bar and you said to yourself, you visualize what does success look like from this conversation, if you visualize your mentee taking the advice that you have and actually applying it in their life and achieving results, if you can visualize that, the likelihood of it happening increases substantially. So what I would love you to do, if you have a moment, just to take 30 seconds, I want you to write down, what do you envision success looking like for your mentee? Not just for you and your mentor relationship with them, but for them when they're leaving this conversation, when they're exiting the conversation, they're going back to their dorm room or into their house or to their apartment or wherever they're going, and they're saying to themselves like, man, I need to get started working on X, A, B, and C task, and they're actually able to achieve the result. What is that result? I want you to write it in the comment section. If you don't mind, take a couple seconds. What does the ideal result look like for your mentee from this relationship? This is a really cool practice exercise in terms of helping you get into the right story of where you want to see your mentee go. Take 30 seconds, write it down in the comment section. Rhett, should my mentee have contacted me by now? The answer is yes. I will facilitate an email introduction for you and your mentee right now. So sometimes, like I said, your mentees are a little bit introverted. I don't know what they're waiting for. Sometimes they're waiting for a career fair to happen. I'll be sure to introduce you to your mentee right now. Right now, immediately after the workshop. So I'll make sure that that happens. I'm just going to make a note on my phone. Awesome. Yeah. Sometimes, I mean, we're talking about college students here. And sometimes they're still building their level of comfort with reaching out to a professional, even though they know it's you, a mentor. So I appreciate your patience with this, Rhett, and I appreciate that that you're here and that you're willing to work with your mentee, because that's awesome. Raven, you want more confidence? You want your mentee to have more confidence in pursuing internship opportunities, both in where to look and self-confidence. That's awesome. I think that's a fantastic goal. Lauren, you said you want to help your mentee obtain a summer 2020 internship. I think that's a fantastic goal to set for your mentee. So Ed, you said your mentee is participating in career fairs and actively pursuing interviews for an engineering internship position. I'm reviewing and advising him on resume and effective interviewing tips. I think that's fantastic. Rhett, thank you again for being patient. That's fantastic. And Ed, that's great. That's great news. And Gary, you said you think it would be identifying 3 to 4 career options to pursue in more detail. I love it. I think the specificity is so crucial, because I think so often sometimes the students will generalize about what we want, or we'll have an idea about what we want, but we don't actually go ahead and pursue the full research of what it takes to actually get to where we want to be. So I think, Gary, that guidance of like honing in on what 3 or 4 career options we might be looking into, I think is a really great goal to set. So those are fantastic stories. That's fantastic. Thank you all for your participation. That's amazing. So the last part is the strategy. So what are the strategies that you're applying to help your mentee go about getting the outcomes that you want to see for him or her? And so when it comes to mentorship, a lot of it is about the questions that you ask, because ultimately you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make the horse drink. I believe that questions are a great way to encourage them to actually dive into the pool, drink that water, to play along with that metaphor. So what do I mean by that? I mean, if you sit there and say, hey, you need to do this, 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 and this, the likelihood that it sticks, very low. But if you say, hey, so your goal is to accomplish this, I love if you could just share with me a little bit about some of the tactics you've gone about going to get there so far. What has worked, what has not worked? What do you think might work in the future? Learn what they think about their next steps are, and then say, hey, well, I've done something similar and this did work and this didn't work, and this is how it played out, and this is the story that I have to share. And by the way, share details. Stories are awesome. Stories with details are even better. Share the detailed story. Don't abbreviate it. They want to hear. Sometimes I think as mentors we think, oh, our stories are boring. Who wants to hear that? No, I promise you, your stories are valuable. They're extremely valuable. Go in as much detail as you can, because ultimately it's those little details that stick into people's mind, and you don't actually know what details stuck the most. So the more details you share, the more likely you are to actually get it to stick in their minds. So some questions that I suggest in terms of helping your mentee be more vulnerable with you revolves around learning their story. So one question that I like to ask to really get to know my mentee on a deeper level and build a deeper relationship with them is I'll say, hey, I would love if you could just tell me your story starting with kindergarten and give me the details. And I know it sounds crazy. You might be thinking to yourselves like, man, that's a long story. Like, we're starting with kindergarten. That's a long time ago. But I think as a 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old, even if they're older, at the end of the day, their whole life is important. And there might be pivotal events that have happened in their childhood or in their teenage years or in their early 20s that played a big role into who they are today. And often we overlook those things. Maybe it's like, hey, I made the basketball team and that gave me the confidence that I could, work on a team successfully. And that made me confident enough to apply for XYZ engineering program. And then boom, and I was able to achieve this. I mean, that could be their story. And you wouldn't have realized that being part of the basketball team is what got them there. And maybe you can relate. Maybe you say, hey, I'm in a similar boat. I made the basketball team too. And that was huge for me. And that totally gave me the confidence. I can totally see that happening. Those bridges are crucial. So by asking them, tell me your story starting with kindergarten, you can find areas of relation. You can find areas of proximity where you can bridge your stories together, because ultimately that's how those relationships really can grow and thrive. When you can find more areas of common bonds. Another question that I like to ask after I ask the tell me your story question, starting with kindergarten, is what is your dream career and how do you plan on getting there? And don't be judgmental, and don't even interrupt, don't interject, don't say anything. Just like ask the question and like stop talking. Just say, hey, tell me what is your dream career and how do you plan on getting there? I'd love to learn. No, and preface this by saying no judgments. I'm excited to learn about what you want to do with your life and your career path. And just I want to be an open book, so share with me. And just sit back and like let them go. And if you feel like they could use a little bit more. So one thing that I like to do, if you're doing a video call with your mentee, if you want them to share a little bit more and continue to elaborate further, this is a body language hack that I've learned, is like nod your head, like move your head to 2 o'clock. So if you imagine your head's like on a pedestal, like right now we're at 12 o'clock, turn it to 2 o'clock and just nod. And just nod. And by doing that, it'll encourage them to talk more, which is the craziest thing, but it works. You can do it at work. If you're talking with anybody at work and you're like, man, I wish this person would talk for a little bit longer or elaborate. You don't actually even have to ask you, just turn your head to 2 o'clock and just nod. And it gets them talking more. Now, obviously, if you're over the phone, you can't do that because they can't see you. But you can say, hey, I'd love, could you just share with me a little bit more about that or elaborate further about what your dream career is or how you plan on getting there and some of the steps that you see getting there. And you know, when they share with you those steps, if you can relate, you can say, hey, I took that step too, and this really worked out for me. And actually, this is something that I didn't expect. Share with them your stories, because that's where you can relate. Don't share with them like, hey, don't do that. Because if you say that, I mean, at the end of the day, people want to learn for themselves. People want to learn how to go about doing something for themselves, and they want to fall on their own face. But if you can share with them a story, that's how people can apply to their life and say, okay, cool. I don't want to fall on my face in that way, but I do want to test out to see if this will actually work for me. So now I'm going to try it in a different way. Hopefully that makes sense. The key is that you can share your stories and in detailed fashion share your stories so then they can learn from them and apply it in their life, as opposed to you saying like, hey, do this and don't do that, because that's not mentorship. That's not going to, the likelihood of that sticking with that mentee is low. So hopefully that is helpful there. And then the other question that I like to ask is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And the reason why this is such a valuable question, because we often ask this in the workplace, but we don't often ask this enough to just people that we're mentoring, because so often in the workplace, you know, we feel obligated to say like, oh, in 5 years, I see myself as like a VP of our company or staying in this similar role. And in reality, the statistics state that more often than not, people are going to transition roles or transition to new departments or potentially new companies or even new whole careers. And that's okay. But I think with your mentee, you can actually say, hey, be honest. I recognize that things are changing. I want to know, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Like, you know, ideally this is where you go, but what other areas interest you and what other paths might you pursue? Because I know that you and your story, I would imagine, I don't know, but I would imagine that you and your story, it's not a perfectly linear story. I'm imagining it doesn't go like college, career, VP, like where I'm at now. I'm imagining it wasn't a perfect line. I would imagine that it took you some time and some circles and some loops and some hurdles to get to where you're at today. And ask them for their story and then share with them some of the hurdles that you went through. I think those are a great way to go about building vulnerable relationships and getting your student to open up by asking those types of questions and just sitting back and listening. Because I believe that ultimately, if you can, you're much more likely to build a stronger bond with them, and they're much more likely to take the advice that you give and actually apply it in the world. Because by having vulnerability, you're building trust. So the other two components of this workshop that I wanted to cover with you all this evening was accountability and perspective. So when it comes to accountability, you can't just say, hey, you need to show up on time or you need to come prepared with questions. I mean, you can set that expectation early on. But I believe that when it goes to accountability beyond just your mentor relationship, it could go to accountability towards a career that you're applying for, or a job fair that you're going to, or going to a professor's office hours, or studying for an exam. I mean, accountability can apply to many facets to a student's life or just a young professional's life. So the questions that I suggest that you ask in terms of helping that mentee build accountability is starting with one, when have you persisted and had it pay off for you? The reason why that's such a valuable question is because one, it allows them to really think back to a time that they actually accomplished something that was really tough, and they had to persist. They had to be triumphant. They had to go through a very difficult time, but they made it through. Because ultimately, sometimes we are not accountable because we give ourselves excuses for why not to do something. So when you can show and have them showcase to you when they persisted through, it shows you and shows themselves that they didn't take no for an answer. So that's a great starting question when it comes to accountability. The second question I like to ask is, what specific actions do you need to take to meet your goal? So by asking that question, you allow them to get real specific. You first prime them by saying, okay, cool. I've done something really hard in my past. I persisted and I made it happen. Now I know what I need to do. What are the things that I need to do to get to my goal? I need to do this, 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 and this. By priming them with the persistence question, by asking them what steps do they need to meet their goal, that allows them to be more realistic about what those steps are. Whereas often, if we don't think about a time that we persisted or we've successfully made it through to something, we will be kind of generic. And by being generic, what that does is it allows us to not achieve that goal, or kind of haphazardly achieve that goal, or semi get there and just call it success. But by thinking about times that you've persisted and made it through, you think like, man, I had to do this, 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 and this. And even though it sounded like nitty gritty details, you are much more likely to come up with the exact list of things that you need to do to be successful. The third question is, who can help you be accountable? Now, it doesn't actually have to be you, the mentor. It could be a good friend. It could be a professor. It could be a parent. It could be, it could be a sibling. It could be anybody. But you ask them, who can help you be accountable? By asking them that question, what it does is it forces them to share those goals, that goal or that thing that they need to do to get to where they need to be with that accountability partner. But it also encourages them to actually follow up with that accountability partner and say, hey, I want you to hold me accountable to this. And that is extremely crucial, because now they have that emotional weight of, shoot, I'm not just letting myself down, I'm letting my accountability partner down. So by asking them who can help you be accountable, it can be you, that'd be amazing, but it could be a friend, it could be somebody else. And so asking them who would they like to be their accountability partner puts the ball in their court. The fourth question is, what systems can you put in place to help you follow through? So are there things that you can do? Essentially ask them, are there things that you can do to say, okay, shoot, I'm behind on my goal. This is what I need to do to make up for it. Because often if we miss our first milestone, we just say, well, I guess we're behind. And you just kind of accept that procrastination. And we don't actually say, crap, we need to make this up. We need to get on it. So by asking what systems can they put in place to help them follow through, what that does is it says it allows them to come up with their own metrics. So as opposed to you saying, hey, okay, you need to hit these metrics, mentee, and then being like, well, I didn't come up with this. This wasn't my idea. So if I don't hit it, I'm not that emotionally attached to it. The likelihood of following through is low. But if you say, hey, well, what systems can you put in place to help you follow through? That allows them to come up with their own answers. And then if you say, hey, I wasn't the one that gave you the milestones, you did. So I'm just saying, did you hit it or did you not? And they're going to feel much more emotionally attached to those goals because they created it themselves. And the fifth question in terms of helping with accountability is, what are the costs and rewards of not following through on your commitments? So what are the costs of not following through on your commitments, and what are the rewards of following through on your commitments? Have them put that in perspective. Have them answer the question. Because if you say like, oh, well, if you don't do this, you're not going to get that internship, or you're not going to get that job, like, sure, that might be that valuable to them. But if you would say, hey, like, in your mind, what's the cost? What's the reward? Where are you going to be? They're going to answer for themselves what is most important to them. So that's something that's really crucial for accountability. Those are 5 questions that I strongly suggest that you ask that helps them build accountability. And this doesn't actually have to be for an internship or a job. It could be for a class. It could be for anything that they're working towards. Truly, it could be for anything that they work towards. But by asking them the questions, as opposed to you going from this is what you need to do to, hey, here are some questions, and they give themselves what they need to do, that is much more likely to get them to stick and actually apply the skills and do it. That's how you can pull out those really, really tantalizing conversations in a mentor relationship. And then in terms of helping someone broaden their perspective, I've got 6 core questions that I like to go to. The first question is, what will this situation look like to you in 10 years? So when it comes to your career, when it comes to your life, what will this look like to you in 10 years? Because sometimes as students or as mentees, we're really short-sighted. We don't think about what's going to happen down the line. Sometimes, and it's so funny, I'll talk to a mentee and, maybe they're like, well, I'm waiting for this big project I'm working on in schoolwork to be done before I reach out to my mentor. And I'm like, hey, in 3 months from now, where will this project be? Like, how important to your life will this project be? And they'll be like, well, the semester will be over, so it won't be that important at all. I'm like, yeah, exactly. But in terms of this mentor, where could this relationship go? Could this mentor potentially introduce you to your future employer? Could this mentor be a guide to you for the rest of your life? And the students would be like, oh, I guess I never really thought about it like that. I never realized like this person could be someone that could be with me for the rest of my life. And so sometimes the point I'm making here is that sometimes mentees are very short-sighted and they're not thinking about the future. So by asking them the question of what will the situation look like to you in 10 years, you're getting them to pull out of, wow, I haven't really thought about what I'll look like at age 29, 30, 31 years old. That's like an eternity for a college student. So ask them, like, where do you see yourself in 10 years? Second question, what are you willing to try that is different? Now, when it comes to broadening your perspective, especially for a student that thinks like, man, I'm going to be on the straight line path. First, I'm going to get this degree in accounting. Then I'm going to go to a career in accounting. Then I'm going to be a CPA. Then I'm going to be a VP of an accounting firm. Like, it may not work out like that. And in fact, you've probably experienced that life doesn't work out on a linear path. So the question here is, what are you willing to try that is different? So if things are not going to work out the way that you want it to, are there things that you're willing to try to get you onto a path that will make you successful, that'll get you close to that 10-year goal that you've set for yourself? Because ultimately, like, your 10-year goal could be to start a family and to have enough money saved in your account that you're on a good path for retirement. Great. If that's the case, amazing. That'd be amazing. That'd be awesome. Maybe your 10-year goal is to travel the world. I don't know. But whatever your 10-year goal is, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's one prescription to getting there. There's multiple avenues towards getting there. So by asking, what are you willing to try that is different, that allows them to think about their goal in a different way and how they're going to go about getting there. The third question is, who do you respect? And how might he or she approach the situation you're facing? This is a great question to ask because it allows them to state a role model. It allows them to give them someone to look over and look at for guidance and insight about how to go about achieving something. See, we're the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. And when we don't give ourselves great role models to look up to or think people to aspire to, when we don't hit our goals, if the people around ourselves are not hitting their goals either, we accept that as the norm. We accept that as like, oh, that's okay. But if we look at someone who we really respect and someone that we know is goal oriented, that has accomplished a ton in their life and career, if we think about how they would approach the situation, we are then able to say, you know what, I could do that too. I could take and be accountable and do the things that I need to do to get there and make sure that it happens. So by asking, who do you respect and how might he or she approach a situation, you're really getting them to think about, how could I approach a situation in a really excellent manner? The fourth question is, what is your attitude about this situation? Is it helping you or hurting you? This is a great question to ask, because if the attitude is negative, back to that whole story thing that we talked about earlier in this workshop, like, what's the story you tell yourself? Like, is my attitude positive or negative? If I'm like Eeyore over here telling myself like, well, this isn't going to work out, or, oh, it hasn't worked out for anybody who I know, so it's probably not going to work out for me. Like, if I tell myself that, how can I possibly expect success from this? How can I possibly expect myself to really change the outcome? If I tell myself, well, this company historically has only hired Ivy League graduates, and I'm not an Ivy League student. Therefore, there's no way I'm going to get this job. If I tell myself that, there's not a chance I'm going to even apply. Like, what's the point? I'm not setting myself up for success, but if you say, hey, what's your attitude about this situation? That's a great way that you could challenge somebody and get them to be real with themselves about, okay, you know what? I really wasn't as confident as I probably should have been. The fifth question is, what is one of your greatest strengths? How can it serve you in this situation? What this does, especially after that fourth question, it allows them to build themselves up. It allows them to see, you know what, here are my redeeming qualities. Here are my strengths. Here is why I'm going to go about doing it. How can it serve me? Because I'm really strong at relationships, or I'm really strong at follow through. I'm really strong at detail orientation. I'm going to make sure that this is going to happen because of my strength. And then the sixth question is, what makes you curious about this issue? This is a good question to ask because it allows them to like take a step back and think to themselves, why am I curious about this 10-year goal for myself? Why is this something that's that important to me? By asking that question, it allows them to think deeper about it and ultimately really get to the root cause of what makes them who they are and what drives them. Because ultimately, sometimes we're curious about things because of social pressures. Like, we're curious about pursuing a career in XYZ because our parents or our friends or what we think we should be doing because it's a pragmatic career for ourselves. But we haven't actually taken a personal inventory to think, what makes me curious about this? So by asking your mentee, what makes you curious about this issue? ideally it can pull back a layer and get them to really take a step back. So that's why those vulnerability questions are so crucial at the very beginning of a conversation and to start your relationship out with, because if you can get them to be comfortable with being vulnerable, when you ask them a question like, what makes you curious about this issue? It's really encouraging because that allows them and gives them the permission to say, you know what? I don't actually know. Or be honest, like, you know what? My parents really pressured me to go into this career path and I don't know if that's the path for me. To have that type of breakthrough is huge. That's super, super, really, that's powerful. It's so impactful. And that's where really you can make a big impact as a mentor. So that is the workshop this evening. Do you have any questions for me? If you do, please post them in the comment section. So this was an excellent workshop. Thank you all for being here. I hope this was helpful. I hope that these tips, these suggested questions were valuable. And if you have any questions about anything at all, please post them in the comment section. If you think of a question on a later date or you're watching the recording of this workshop, feel free to send me an email with your question. I'd be more than happy to answer it. But it looks like we don't have any questions. So thank you all for being here. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening. And I hope you have a great rest of your October and November and have some great conversations with your mentee.